Hey everyone, DisturbedShadow here, back to bring you another album review. I know I just finished my last discography, going through the Trivium discography, but there was another one I really wanted to get to, and I kind of missed a lot of the days I was planning to record videos, so I sort of had to record them all really close together. And so I'll be jumping right into my review of the next discography I'm going to do, and that is, of course, another one of my personal favorite bands, and that is Avenged Sevenfold. So today we will be discussing their debut album entitled Sounding the Seventh Trumpet, which was released back in 2001. So let's just jump in and talk about this album. First thing I want to mention is I'm going to be talking about the re-release version from 2002, which the only difference is that the intro track was replaced with a new version of it featuring Synyster Gates, who had joined the band after this album's original release. So that's the version of the album I own, and that's the version of the album that I reviewed. So let's just jump in and talk about some of my personal favorite tracks on the album. So we'll start off with the track I just mentioned, which is the opening track, To End the Rapture, which, of course, is the only track on this version of the album to feature Synyster Gates on the guitars. So this song has a lot more of a melodic style than compared to some of the other songs of the album, because it introduced Synyster Gates into the band, and he has that very unique, recognizable melodic guitar style. And it's an interesting way to open up the album. It's got a great feel to it. And it's just a short little minute-and-a-half track with some sort of shredding and melodic guitar stuff, and then Matt does some singing over that. And so it's a little short track to open the album, and it's a pretty catchy song, and it's a great way to open up the album, and I really enjoy that track. Then moving on to track number 2, which is another personal favorite of mine off of this album, which is Turn the Other Way, which is one of the better songs on the album in my opinion. It's just got some pretty great riffs throughout the whole song. It progressively changes throughout the song and just keeps things interesting throughout the whole thing. And the Rev's drumming really stands out on this track, because there's just some cool, crazy drumming moments that he's known for, scattered all throughout this track. And then there's some just really great guitar work from Zacky throughout the track to keep the listener engaged. There's always trying different new and catchy riffs that sort of keep things interesting, like I said. There's a cool little acoustic guitar bit at the end when it sort of goes to this more melodic style of singing after the main part of the song being mostly screams. So it sort of changes as it goes along, as I said before. But like I said, it's a really good track. It's one of my personal favorites on the album. The next one is track number 3, Darkness Surrounding, which is another one that just starts off really heavy and then sort of pulls back to a more pulled back and melodic style towards the end, where it sort of front loads it with all the screaming and then pulls back to more melodic singing at the end. And just the main thing that really stands out on this track is the Rev's drumming. Again, is phenomenal. Just doing all these insane drum parts, and they're just stacking all these different fills and stuff together to just really pummel you with the rhythm section on this one. So it's just some pretty great stuff happening there. Next track I want to talk about, track number 4, The Art of Subconscious Illusion, which is one of the more faster paced songs on the album. There's a lot of just fast but rather simplistic guitar stuff happening, but the song is not really focused on the guitars as much. There's lots of great drumming bits, and then, of course, some really heavy vocals from it. And the one interesting thing is that there is a guest female vocalist for like a few parts towards the end of the songs. Just an interesting thing that they did there, and just have her and Matt trade off some lines. It's just interesting that they did that, and it just sounds really nice. And there's just cool guitar stuff sort of when the song begins to end, the last little bit of the song, where they're just sliding the pick along the neck to make that like scratchy, scrapey sound that a lot of metal bands use. And they just keep layering a bunch of those together. It just sounds interesting. The next song I want to talk about, track number 5, We Come Out at Night, which is the only song that actually had a music video for it off of this album. A pretty good song. What I like about it is it's got this really catchy melodic chorus, and then they throw in some acoustic guitars and a piano bit at the end to keep things a bit interesting. So they're just progressively changing throughout the song, which is something that happens a lot on this album, where they don't necessarily follow a strict verse, chorus, verse style, where they sort of do whatever they want. There's no real set structure to the song, so that keeps things kind of interesting. Next track I want to talk about is track number 7, Warmness on the Soul, which is one of the more unique songs off the album, as it is a piano ballad, which might seem slightly out of place, especially on this album, but Avenged Sevenfold is known to not really play by the rules, so they sort of, on this really, mainly a metal, like a very scream-heavy metalcore album, they threw in this all clean singing with melodic guitars and acoustic guitars and piano throughout the whole song to sort of change things up. So it's a bit different compared to some of the other stuff in the album. Next track I want to talk about is track number 8, An Epic of Time Wasted, which is another one of my personal favorites. It's just got a really great progression to it. There's some really great guitar work that really, it's catchy and gets in your head. Even though it's not the most complex guitar stuff, it's great riffs that really just get stuck in your head. And just great vocal work again from Matt to keep things interesting. And then another song I want to talk about, track number 9, Breaking Their Hold. It's probably my least favorite Avenged Sevenfold song of all time. There's not much to it. The guitar work is kind of bland. It's only like a minute long, and there's just not much to it. I don't really enjoy this track. And it brings the album down a little bit, but it's not too big of a deal because it's so short. But I tend to just skip over it. But it's not a terrible song, but there's just nothing to it that really makes you go, wow, I want to go and listen to Breaking Their Hold. So it's just kind of there. Track number 12, Streets, which is another sort of interesting song in that it's very melodic. There's no screams. It's all clean singing, and it's got some really great catchy guitar riffs that really pop in your head, even though it's just a few notes and chords, but they're just really catchy, and I really enjoy this song. It's just got a great vibe to it. And finally, the last track I want to talk about is the closing track, Shattered by Broken Dreams, which just has some cool acoustic guitar stuff in the beginning, and just has a great progression to it, and I really enjoy this song. Plus, it's another song that has a lot of great drumming from the rev, where it sort of does the more pulled back or simplistic stuff for the slower melodic parts of the song, and then it sort of gets heavy, more technical with some of the heavier parts of the song. So he keeps things varied, and he knows how to fit with the song. So it's a great song, and it's a great way to end this album. So that wraps up my discussion of some of the individual tracks, and now we'll go on and talk about the band members themselves, which I do have a few complaints, but it's understandable because it's their first album. It was recorded on a very small budget, and I actually read that they did like the drums and some of the other stuff in one take, so there's a few issues on the production of it, but other than that, it's a really solid effort for their first album. So let's talk about what they're doing. First, we'll talk about M Shadows, or Matt Shadows, whatever you want to call him, but credited M Shadows on lead vocals. This is one of the more scream-heavy albums that they've done, so that's because they sort of transitioned away from that style over time, but his voice is very hard to understand at sometimes, and it's just, I don't know, it doesn't sound like he's really nailed down the technique for screaming at this point. And that's probably why he had that vocal surgery at some point, because it's just not that great at times. It's kind of hard to understand, but it's alright for a first effort. And I don't really have any complaints on the clean singing itself, because he's got a really nice melodic voice, and there's not really issues there, and he's always really easy to understand on that end. It's just some of the screams could use a little work, but for what it is, it's not that bad, considering this is their first album, so not that bad. Going on, Zacky Vengeance on the guitar. This album is a lot more simplistic guitar-wise compared to some of the other stuff. One, because they just have the one guitarist, and two, because it's their first effort, and it's the first album they've recorded as a band. So there's a lot of simplistic stuff, but he still does a good job of having these catchy riffs that get stuck in your head in a few songs, like Turn the Other Way, Darkness Surrounding, We Come Out at Night, and The Streets, stuff like that, where they have these really catchy riffs that get in your head and make you want to listen to the songs. But there are other moments where the guitar work really isn't doing much interesting, but it's a pretty solid first effort for him, especially as a one guitarist in this band, which later becomes two guitarists. And of course, the most interesting guitar parts are, of course, on To End the Rapture, where they have two guitarists, and Synyster Gates adds his melodic playing to it to keep things more interesting. And then, of course, the Rev on the drums. Even on their first album, he's doing an amazing job, and he's probably the most talented musician on this record. And what I mean by that is that he's sort of already at the level that he's been playing, that he plays at on their future albums, where the rest of the band sort of catches up to that level, and they're really solid on later albums, but you can still see that they're sort of just starting out on this one. But the Rev really starts off really strong, and there's so many great drumming moments throughout this album, whether it's on Turn the Other Way, or Darkness Surrounding, or Shattered by Broken Dreams, or Thick and Thin, where he has these really interesting guitar parts that really stand out. I mean, drum parts that really stand out. And he's throwing in all these interesting fills and doing all this crazy stuff, and just really technical drumming, and it keeps things interesting. And finally, Just Insane on the bass. This is his only appearance with the band, because Johnny Christ joined between this album and the recording of their next album. But he's doing an all-right job. The bass is turned up nice and loud so we can hear it, and it's going along with the guitars for the most part. But there are a few moments where it's going off and doing its own thing. So the main track I want to talk about on the bass is An Epic of Time Wasted, which has this really heavy bass in the beginning. It just has a great sound and tone to it, and I really like it. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of interesting stuff happening on the bass, so I'm looking forward to the next album when Johnny Christ comes in, and I won't talk about that. But for now, that wraps up my discussion of the band members themselves, and I'll just go into my final thoughts on the album. Is I think this is their weakest album, but that's because it is their debut album, and they're still sort of finding their sound and finding their style. Plus, it was recorded on a really low budget, so the production quality is not quite up to par, but the songwriting is pretty solid. There's a few moments where it needs some work, but like I said, it's their first effort, and they're sort of just finding their sound and their songwriting style. But there are a few songs that I have mentioned several times that really stand out and make this album worth checking out. So it's a great effort from the band, and it's a great starting point. And I look forward to listening through all their albums and seeing how they change over time. Even though I've listened to all these albums many times, it'll be interesting to sort of just go through them all and talk about them and see things that have changed throughout their career. But like I said, it's a great starting point. It's not their best album. It's definitely worth checking out, but maybe not if you're new to the band, maybe not the album you want to check out. But if you like their more like screamy style vocals and stuff like that, this is definitely one of the albums you should check out, whereas I sort of moved away from that on future albums. But it's a really solid album, like I said, and you should definitely check it out. And that will wrap up the review. So remember to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and to subscribe if you want to see more of my reviews of metal albums and rock albums sometimes, but mostly metal albums. And of course, I will see you guys in the next video when I continue on with the Avenged Sevenfold discography with their next album, Waking the Fallen.